My husband left me under the influence of his ex-girlfriend, believing I was carrying another man's child, so I decided to leave him. But 8 years later, he came back, wanting to meet his son. My ex-husband was probably the most privileged person I've ever known. Leaving him may have been one of the best decisions I've ever made, and I thought I could quietly move on with my life. Then he came back. Let me give you some background. 8 years ago, I was happily married to my husband, Nathan, or so I thought. We'd been together for 2 years, engaged for almost a year, and were planning our wedding. At that time, I would have defended our marriage and given everything for it. I thought we were soulmates, but apparently, I was the only one who thought so. In the first few months after our wedding, Nathan lost his job. It was a tough time for both of us, but I believed we'd get through it, and I thought he'd find a new job soon. At that point, we still had some savings, and I was working full-time. Life was a little difficult, but Nathan kept looking for work. Finally, after countless interviews, he landed a new job. I remember the excitement on his face when he got the email offering him the position. I took him out to dinner to celebrate. Little did I know, that job would eventually destroy our marriage. When Nathan came home after his first day at the new job, he looked terrible. I could immediately tell something was wrong. I asked him what had happened, and he weakly told me, "It's nothing, really, just some work stuff. No need to talk about it." That made me uneasy. I tried to get him to talk more, but he seemed reluctant. Finally, he said, "I really didn't want to tell you this, but Jessica is here at the company." Jessica was Nathan's ex-girlfriend. They had been together for 3 years, and Nathan had proposed to her, but she rejected him and then dumped him. This had all happened before we met, and I knew about it. I also knew that Nathan had been hurt by her, and he rarely spoke about her. Of course, I didn't want them to have any contact, but now she was working at Nathan's new company. I could sense that Nathan was anxious, and I was feeling a bit conflicted. But I tried to keep my emotions in check and said, "It's fine. It's been so long. You and her can't have anything left, right?" He replied, "No, of course not, but you have to trust me." I didn't expect this to happen. He reassured me that there was nothing going on between him and Jessica anymore, and he even said that if it bothered me too much, he would quit his job. I looked at him with a mix of emotions, but I told him, "No, you don't need to quit. I know this is bothering you, but I trust you. There's nothing to worry about." In the months that followed, I began to realize that it wasn't just his job that was problematic. Jessica had become a third party in our relationship. I always believed my trust in Nathan was strong enough, but the way he and Jessica interacted more and more made me uneasy, especially since she was constantly present in his life at work. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. That day, when I took the test at home, I felt a mixture of emotions. The result was positive. I was a little shocked, but also secretly hopeful that this could be a new beginning for us. I decided to wait until Nathan came home to tell him. When Nathan came home that evening, he looked tired and distant. He had been acting strange for weeks now, and I couldn't put my finger on it. As soon as he walked through the door, I told him, "I have something to tell you." His face immediately tensed up, and I noticed the subtle change in his demeanor. "What is it?" he asked, trying to mask his worry. "I'm pregnant," I said, watching his reaction carefully. For a brief moment, he froze. His eyes widened and his mouth opened as if he was about to say something, but nothing came out. He stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he said, "Are you sure?" His voice was cold, and there was a hint of disbelief in it. I nodded, feeling a sharp pang of hurt. "Yes, I'm sure. I just found out today." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the couch and sat down, his face in his hands. I could see the tension in his body, and for a moment, I thought he was trying to process the news. But then he looked up at me, and there was something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before: fear. "I don't know if I'm ready to be a father," he confessed. "I don't know if we're ready." I felt a knot in my stomach. I had never expected him to react this way. I had hoped for a different response, one filled with excitement, or at least reassurance. But instead, there was doubt. And in that moment, I realized something had changed. Our relationship wasn't what it used to be, and it was becoming clear that Nathan didn't want the same things as I did. As the days passed, things only got worse. Nathan's mood became more distant, and he started to act as if the pregnancy didn't matter. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words felt cold and detached. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica was somehow involved in all of this. There were days when Nathan would come home late from work, and I'd find traces of perfume on his clothes, her perfume. The smell was faint but unmistakable. I confronted him one evening. "Nathan, is there something going on between you and Jessica?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steadied. He hesitated for a moment, and then the words came out, cold and sharp. "It's none of your business." That was it. That was the moment I knew for sure that our marriage was over. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and heartbroken. The man I had trusted, the man I had married, was now someone I didn't even recognize. I could feel the walls closing in around me. A few days later, Nathan packed his things and left. He didn't even give me a proper explanation. He just left, and I was left alone, pregnant, and devastated. I tried to contact him, to reach out and make sense of everything, but he refused to speak to me. Instead, I received a text one night, a message that cut deeper than anything else. "I'm not sure if the baby is mine. I need some time away from you, from everything." That was the last straw. Not only had he left me, but now he was questioning the paternity of my child. I couldn't believe what was happening. I had never felt so alone and betrayed. I decided then that I wasn't going to wait for him anymore. I was going to raise my child on my own. No matter what, I would protect my baby from the hurt and confusion that Nathan had caused. I moved out of our shared apartment, found a new place to live, and began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, but I had no choice. My child needed me, and I couldn't let anything, especially Nathan's indecision, stop me from moving forward. Years passed, and my life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I became a single mother, and though it wasn't the life I had imagined, I found strength in the love I had for my child. I worked hard, built a life, and gave my son everything I could. There were times when I missed the family I thought we would be, but I knew I had made the right choice. Then, 8 years later, out of nowhere, Nathan came back. He reached out to me through social media, asking if we could meet. I was hesitant at first, but curiosity got the better of me. What did he want? Why now, after all this time? I agreed to meet him, but I was resolute. I had moved on, and I didn't want him to think I would simply welcome him back into my life. When I met him, he looked older, worn down by life. He was no longer the man I once knew. He apologized for the way he had left, the way he had treated me. He said he had made mistakes and that he had spent the years regretting his decisions. He wanted to meet our son, he said, to make amends. But I wasn't sure if I could forgive him. I had built a life without him, and I had become strong in ways I never thought possible. I didn't need him to come back and undo all the progress I had made. He insisted on meeting our son. I was torn. I didn't want to deprive my son of a chance to know his biological father, but I also didn't want him to get hurt. I agreed to let him meet him, but only on my terms. It would be on my terms, and nothing would ever be the same. The reunion was awkward, to say the least. My son didn't know who Nathan was at first. He was polite, but distant, just as I had expected. Nathan tried to make small talk, but there was a wall between them, one that couldn't be bridged by just a few meetings or a couple of apologies. In the weeks that followed, Nathan tried to reach out more, asking if he could spend more time with our son. But each time he did, I found myself retreating further. I wasn't sure what he thought would happen. Maybe he believed he could waltz back into our lives and everything would magically fall into place. But for me, the damage had already been done. As much as I wanted to protect my son from the pain of his father's abandonment, I also knew that my son deserved to know the truth. He deserved to understand that his mother had been the one to fight for him, to protect him, to give him the life he had. He didn't need a man who had walked out on him, no matter how much regret he claimed to have now. It was hard to let go of the idea of a family, of the dream I had once had for us. But in the end, I realized that family wasn't about blood. It was about love, sacrifice, and commitment. And I had already given my son that. Nathan may have come back, but I had already moved on. And I was determined to continue moving forward, with or without him.